I recognized the moment the Suburban rolled into the garage that it wasn't just a vehicle. There was weight in the way it moved over the wet pavement, the tires humming a tired rhythm, and the subtle sag in the suspension that spoke louder than any engine knock. The man driving it didn't hurry. He eased in slowly, hands gripping the wheel tighter than necessary, eyes flicking from the rearview mirror to the side panels, as if expecting something to speak back. When he finally got out, he didn't greet me. He didn't smile. He just exhaled through his nose and muttered that the car wasn't responding like it used to. I nodded, silently understanding that this was not about mechanical failure. This was about history, about years of neglect that weren't accidental but deliberate, because dealing with the car meant dealing with everything he had left behind. The Suburban had been bought when his son was still a teenager. Back then, it had been more than a car. It had been freedom, a promise of adventure. Long stretches of road where father and son could talk about everything and nothing at all. He remembered trips to nowhere, ice cream cones melting in the summer heat, music blasting through the speakers, laughter echoing off the seats. Those memories lingered like a scent in the leather and fabric, unwashed, unresolved. But time had been cruel. Conversations had dwindled into silence. Arguments had turned into avoidance. And slowly, the car had been left behind as their relationship frayed. By the time he stopped driving it regularly, the Suburban had absorbed all the tension, all the quiet disappointment, all the longing that no one dared voice. When he opened the hood, I could see the hesitation in his movements. It wasn't that he didn't know how to handle the engine. He did. Years of familiarity made that obvious. But he touched the metal and paused, not because it might break, but because touching it meant acknowledging the gap it represented. The distance between him and his son, between what he had been and what he had become. I worked quietly, letting the car and its man speak in silence. That's how I've learned to hear stories, through careful observation, through listening to pauses, to hesitations, to the rhythm of breaths and the subtle weight of fingers on metal. It was telling me everything without uttering a word. The problems were minor. Old belts, a few corroded connections, some dust, and where that comes from standing still too long. But I could see that fixing those parts was only half the battle. The real repair had to happen inside the man himself. And the car was the vessel holding it together. Every adjustment I made, every tightened bolt, was accompanied by a quiet story he told aloud in fragments, not to me, but to the seats, the dashboard, the mirrors. He admitted, almost ashamedly, that he had ignored the Suburban for months, even years. Because confronting it meant confronting the silence that had grown between him and his son. Each mile driven had once been a promise. Each mile ignored was a reminder of absence. He talked about the day it had stopped responding. It was the same day his son stopped responding to messages, to calls, to any attempt at connection. Nothing dramatic, no fight, no shouting. Just a quiet withdrawal. Like someone slowly disappearing from your life without making noise. He said the car had refused to start, or at least refused to behave, mirroring the son's absence. And he hadn't known whether to feel anger or sadness. That's when I realized this wasn't about mechanics. This was about reconciliation. And the car had become the medium through which it might happen. He wasn't trying to fix an engine. He was trying to fix the space between them. While I worked, he kept glancing at the driver's seat, the steering wheel, the empty passenger side. Sometimes he'd talk to it, apologizing quietly, recounting small things he should have done, little moments missed. I should have listened, he said softly, almost to himself, almost to the car. I should have stayed for the games, for the conversations I didn't think mattered. The Suburban held that weight, and as I tightened bolts and cleaned connections, I felt the tension in him ease slightly, as if the car were beginning to return some of what it had been holding. It was a delicate balance, too much too fast, and the truth could overwhelm, but enough steadily to remind him that both the car and his son were still there, waiting. By the end of the first day, The engine hummed more confidently, but he didn't ask for a test drive. He didn't want to confront how it would feel to hear it respond after all that silence. He left the garage, lingering at the door, as if part of him still feared what would happen when he finally returned to drive it. And I knew without asking that this was only the beginning. The car wasn't just returning to life. It was reopening a door he had long left closed. He didn't come back the next day or the day after. That's typical in this line of work. People need time to sit with the weight of what's happening. But on the third morning, he appeared at the garage before the sun had fully risen. There was no hesitation this time. No checking over his shoulder, no careful, measured steps. He walked straight to the Suburban and ran his hand across the roof. The metal felt cold under his fingers, but his grip was firm, determined. He said the car had been sitting too long, and so had he, and that maybe it was time to see if both could still move forward. I nodded quietly, letting him take the lead. Some lessons can't be taught. They have to be experienced. We started with small things, adjusting mirrors, checking fluids, listening to the engine hum. Each minor fix brought a little more life into the Suburban. But more importantly, each one seemed to draw a little more life into him. He talked softly while I worked about how the silences at home had grown so long that he had almost stopped noticing them. About the little things he missed, seeing his son laugh at something stupid on the road, the sound of him singing along to songs he thought were uncool, the small shared moments that now felt impossible to retrieve. I could hear regret in his voice, but also a quiet hope he hadn't allowed himself in years. When we were done with the engine, he insisted on sitting inside before turning it over. He breathed in slowly, taking in the smell of old leather, the faint scent of his son's past presence. He admitted that driving it again scared him, not because the car wouldn't perform, but because it would force him to confront what he had lost. I stayed back, letting him take the space he needed. There's a rhythm to returning to things you once loved but abandoned. Forcing it only breaks the moment. Finally, he turned the key. The engine roared to life, smooth, confident, familiar. And for the first time in months, he allowed himself a small smile. It wasn't victory. It wasn't resolution. It was acknowledgement. The car had responded. And maybe that meant he could too. He started the vehicle slowly, rolling it out of the garage and down the street. He wasn't sure where he was going. He didn't need to be. Moving was the lesson. Forward, not back. He began to talk about attempts he had made to reconnect with his son. Small messages sent, calls that went unanswered, invitations ignored. He admitted he had been afraid of rejection, of being laughed at or dismissed. The Suburban had held that fear, he said, quiet and patient, waiting until he was ready to carry it forward. We drove in silence for a few blocks. Then he told me he planned to drive around the city before calling his son. Not to apologize, not to fix everything at once, just to remind himself that he could still reach out without crumbling. When we returned to the garage that afternoon, he didn't park and leave immediately. He lingered by the driver's door, stroking the dashboard and seats as if saying goodbye to old mistakes. He admitted that part of him had believed it was too late, but the car had reminded him that it wasn't, that some things, even if delayed, can be reclaimed. He finally left with a quiet understanding that the road ahead was long, but at least it had been reopened. And I watched the Suburban sit under the shop lights, not broken, not abandoned, but waiting for its next chapter to be written. A few days later, he returned again, this time with a purpose that was different from before. He climbed into the driver's seat slowly, as if entering a room he hadn't been in for years, and sat quietly for a long moment. I could see his fingers trace the contours of the steering wheel, familiar yet foreign, like touching a memory he had once taken for granted. He said he had spent nights thinking about the car, about the distance between him and his son, and realized that he needed to face both at the same time. Sitting there, engine off, he admitted he was afraid the vehicle would remind him too much of failure. I told him that sometimes the vehicle does more than remind. It offers a chance to rewrite the story. When he finally started the Suburban, the engine purred smoothly, almost encouragingly, and he exhaled the breath he had been holding for months. We drove slowly, windows down despite the chill, letting the car roll through familiar streets. He talked about the small moments he missed. The morning breakfast where his son would sneak an extra toast. The music he insisted was embarrassing, but still sang along to. The jokes shared in the back seat that no one else ever heard. Each mile seemed to carry a memory, each turn a reflection. But instead of pain, there was also a growing sense of possibility. He admitted that after the first attempt to reconnect, he had frozen. Calls left unreturned, texts ignored, and an awkwardness that he didn't know how to break. The car, he said, had been the only place where he felt grounded enough to start moving again. There was a pattern, he realized. The car didn't judge. It didn't demand explanations or apologies. It simply waited, ready to carry him forward when he was ready. That was a lesson he had forgotten in life. Patience often precedes reconciliation. As we drove past the old neighborhood, he began to imagine inviting his son for a ride, not to lecture, not to force answers, just to share space again. He laughed softly, the first laugh that sounded genuine in weeks, because he realized it wasn't too late. He said the Suburban had reminded him that time alone doesn't erase the possibility of reconnection. It only tests your willingness to try. I could see the tension leave his shoulders gradually, replaced by something fragile but promising. By the time we returned to the garage, he was quiet again, but it was a different quiet. It wasn't fear or hesitation. It was reflection. He leaned back, hands resting lightly on the wheel, and said that maybe the car had been waiting for him all along, not to take him back to the past, but to give him courage for the future. The Suburban sat patiently as if it understood its role in this story. A vessel not for what had been lost, but for what could still be regained. And I knew without a word that the next drive he took would not just be on streets, but toward a chance to reconnect, to rebuild what had been left behind. A few more days passed before he returned again. This time he didn't just sit in the garage. He climbed into the Suburban and started it almost immediately, as if he had rehearsed this moment in his mind for hours. I followed silently, knowing that this drive would be different. There was a tension in him, not from fear of the car, but from fear of confronting his son's absence in the months of silence that had stretched between them. The engine hummed confidently under him, but the real journey was inside, navigating the uncertainty and guilt he had carried for far too long. He drove slowly at first, down familiar streets that seemed smaller now, lined with memories he had tried to avoid. He spoke quietly, recounting moments he had missed. The day his son had earned a medal at school, the birthday parties he had skipped, the simple afternoons when they could have shared stories in the back seat. Each recollection was heavy, a reminder of what had been lost. Yet each word spoken seemed to lift a small weight from his chest. I realized then that cars, like people, carry emotional loads that no mechanic can fix alone. They respond only when the person driving chooses to move forward. As we approached the park where he had once taken his son for weekend drives, he slowed the vehicle to a stop and looked out the window. He admitted he had been afraid of rejection, of being met with coldness after all this time. But he also admitted that staying silent had been worse. He reached for his phone and sent a simple message. "Want to take a ride?" He didn't expect an immediate answer. He didn't need one. He needed to act first, to show willingness, to take the step he had avoided for months. While waiting, he started the engine again and drove through the empty streets, feeling the Suburban respond beneath him. The engine's steady rhythm matched the rhythm of his thoughts, calming him. He realized that the car had been more than a vehicle. It had been a sanctuary, a place where he could gather courage without judgment. It had held all the memories, all the weight of absence. And now it was carrying him toward possibility. He whispered to himself that maybe, just maybe, some doors could reopen even after years of closing. When he finally parked outside his son's house, the reply came, "I'll be ready in 5." He smiled, a slow, real smile that reached his eyes, and looked at the Suburban with gratitude. It had done more than carry him physically. It had carried him emotionally, bridging the gap that words alone could not. He turned off the engine, stepped out, and for the first time in months, he felt the tension in his chest release. The Suburban had given him more than a ride. It had given him a chance to rebuild connection. And as he walked toward the front door, I knew the car had fulfilled its purpose, just as he was ready to fulfill his. He didn't rush. He walked slowly to the front door, keys in one hand, heart in the other, carrying the weight of months of silence. I watched from the garage as he rang the doorbell, feeling the same tension I had felt countless times with other cars, other people, other moments. The door opened, and for a long moment neither spoke. There was no anger, no blame, only the raw, fragile hope that had been growing inside him during every mile in the Suburban. Then, finally, his son stepped forward, tentative, curious, and the silence between them began to dissolve. They didn't need a long conversation. They didn't need explanations. A shared glance, a small smile, and the understanding that what was lost could start being reclaimed was enough. The Suburban waited patiently in the driveway, engine off, seat belts untouched, as if it knew its job had been done. The car that had carried years of absence and regret now sat quietly, a silent witness to reconnection. And as the father and son finally walked together toward the open road of new beginnings, I realized once again that vehicles like this Suburban are not just machines. They are keepers of memory, facilitators of courage, and sometimes bridges to healing. After they left, I stood by the garage door, listening to the fading hum of the engine as it disappeared around the corner. The Suburban had restored more than mobility. It had restored possibility. And in this garage, I've learned that some cars do more than transport people. They transport hope, second chances, and the reminder that even after years of silence, reconnection is possible. If this story moved you, if you've ever felt the weight of absence or the hesitation of reaching out, there are more stories waiting in this garage. Each car with its own lessons, its own memories, its own chance to heal. Subscribe to the channel, stay with me, and let's discover together how every car tells a story, and how sometimes listening to these stories helps us remember who we still can be.